Have you ever gone through a period where you found yourself wondering, have I lost my mojo? Maybe spirit left me. Maybe I've fallen off the path. Maybe I've lost my powers. Maybe I never really had my powers. Maybe I'm deluding myself. What if you haven't lost anything? What if the current is still flowing perfectly? What if what is going on is that you are exhausted? There's a difference between stress and strain. When you go to the gym and you want to build some muscles, you have to put stress on that muscle. You have to put some weight, some resistance, and you have to increase that stress over time in order to build that muscle. When you want to learn a new skill, you have to put some stress on yourself in order to build the mental muscles necessary to learn the new skill. When you're trying to build a business, you have to put some stress on yourself in order to build that business. And when you're developing magical abilities, you have to put stress on yourself in order to build those abilities. Anybody that's gone through my basic training in non-denominational witchcraft called a witch's primer, there's 18 weeks of lessons, and there's a 5-week period within the course that is based on building your muscles, magically speaking. And there is some stress that we ask you to put yourself under when you're building your magical abilities. Without stress, there is no growth. There's no adaptation. There's no strengthening. Muscles grow because resistance or stress is applied. Students grow because stress is applied through challenges. Magical practitioners grow because their consciousness is stretched by putting stress on it. A life without stress is a life without growth. The problem isn't stress, the problem is strain. Burnout doesn't come from stress, burnout comes from strain. When stress becomes strain, it's because the stress was applied too suddenly or too much stress was applied. Too much, too fast, too long, and without sufficient recovery. Applying too much stress, applying stress too quickly, applying stress for too long of a period of time, and not allowing for periods of recovery between the stress. You know, the muscles don't grow during the workout. The muscles grow during the recovery. As the muscles are being repaired from the stress that was applied in the workout, muscles grow. As above, so below. What's true for muscles in the gym is true for any kind of growth. Growing happens through the rest periods between the stress periods. What causes strain in spiritual practice is applying stress too much and too quickly, usually is manifest in things such as trying to do everything at once, trying to learn every skill at once, trying to solve every problem and not ever having some period of integration, obsessing over our manifestations and not letting the spell go, trying to force outcomes rather than allowing the outcomes to manifest naturally, constant worry, constant perfectionism. Stress builds strength and strain depletes strength. When you have strain, you have injury. And then you're forced to rest. If you injure a muscle, you're forced to rest that muscle so that it can repair itself. Nature's going to get the rest one way or another. It's a lot easier for us to integrate the rest into our practice rather than waiting until we hit burnout. And then there's no option but rest in order to repair the damage. This is where many practitioners seem to be confused. There's a difference between discipline and struggle. Discipline is always calm, it's consistent, it's sustainable. Struggle usually is fearful or frantic, often desperate, and usually exhausting. Many people think they need more discipline, but what they really need is less struggle. So you might want to ask yourself, am I practicing because I trust in the results? Or am I practicing because I'm afraid that I won't get the results? Am I working magic or am I trying to force reality? Discipline works with the current. Struggle fights against the current. Struggle creates injury. Struggle encourages us to carry things on our shoulders that don't belong to us. Ask yourself, what burdens are you carrying? Are you carrying responsibilities for other people? Are you carrying the burden of fear of the future? Are you carrying the burden of guilt or regret from the past? Are you carrying a burden of resentment towards someone or yourself? Are you carrying the burden of the need to know everything? Are you carrying the burden of needing to control the timing of things? Burnout usually comes from carrying too much, doing too much. Sometime this week, I recommend that you get out a piece of paper and at the top of the piece of paper, write the burdens I'm carrying are, and just list until you either get to the bottom of the page or you start repeating the same things over and over again. There is no burden that is yours to carry. If you have a backpack and every day you put another rock in the backpack or another handful of rocks in the backpack, you keep putting those rocks in the backpack and putting those rocks in the backpack, and then you wonder why you're so tired all the time. You got to not only take the rocks out of the backpack, you got to get the backpack off your back so that there's no place for you to put the rocks in the first place. Because there is no burden that you're meant to carry. If you're feeling like you're carrying a burden, it is automatically in your sphere of influence to release that burden. So that's one way that we get our burnout, is because we carry burdens with us that we think are ours to carry. Sometimes we're very proud of our burdens. Look how spiritual I am. Remind yourself there is no burden that is meant for me to carry. So that's one thing. And we've talked a lot about casting the burden and how you don't need burdens and all of that. So there's many rituals that I've given you and many lectures on this, so we don't need to belabor that point. Another reason for a magical burnout is that you've been growing. You've been growing and the universe wants you to have a period of rest in order for that growth to manifest and integrate. You've had a breakthrough maybe, you've ended a toxic relationship, you've changed your career, you've had some sort of spiritual awakening, you've done a lot of deep magical work. Well, you're not supposed to do that 24/7. You're supposed to allow yourself, just like with going to the gym, a period of rest in order for the benefits to integrate. So if you've had some big things going on in your spiritual practice and you're feeling burned out, it's because you've forgotten that you need to rest. You need downtime after those things. Growth consumes energy. Growth needs stress, but stress needs to be cyclical if it's constructive. If it's not, it becomes strain. Integration is necessary. Recovery is necessary. When somebody's had surgery, it's a wonderful thing if the surgery was successful, but they need to recover. Every positive change needs rest and recuperation. Every positive change has some sort of micro injuries. Just like your muscles have little micro injuries when you work out, and the healing of those injuries is what causes their growth. Micro injuries are necessary for spiritual growth as well. And if we don't allow ourselves those down periods, those rest periods, and that's not built into our practice, then we're not going to grow. We are going to strain ourselves. And once you're strained, the universe is going to require you to have the rest that you haven't been giving yourself. And those kinds of forced retirements are rarely necessary if we've been moving through our practice thoughtfully. Transformation has a cost, just like anything. We talked about the cost to magic. All magic has its price. Transformation has a price. So if you've been transforming, good work, wonderful, that's fabulous. But don't forget that that needs to have rest afterwards. Nature understands this better than we do. Nature has cycles, day and night, waxing and waning moons, 4 seasons, ebbing and flowing tides, harvest, planting, and dormancy. Nothing in nature remains in constant expansion, but people think they're supposed to be in constant expansion. The obsession with constant productivity, constant healing, constant growth. We don't get the benefit of those things because we forget that we need to follow those things with periods of rest. We give nature permission to rest. Why don't we give ourselves permission to rest? Rest is also magical work. Rest isn't quitting. Rest isn't laziness. Rest doesn't mean you're abandoning your practice. Rest is integration, restoration, recalibration, and it's preparation for the next thing. Seeds go underground and rest before they start to germinate. Incubation periods in magical work are just as important as incubation periods in the rest of nature. Remember that just because you can't see movement doesn't mean that it's not happening. Periods of apparent stillness are often periods of hidden growth. Recovery and growth are not two separate things. Recovery is part of the growth cycle. If you grow without recovery, you're not growing, you're straining, and you're killing whatever it is that you're trying to grow. When you are in a period of rest, you know when it's time to exit the period of rest because you start to get curious about the next thing. You start to have inspirations where you didn't have them before. Your intuition starts speaking to you again. Your synchronicities become apparent again. Your joy for the magical process returns. The rituals that you perform become alive again. So when you notice that things don't have the luster that they used to in your practice, it's possibly time for you to go into a bit of a dormant period. The current never stops flowing during a dormant period. It's going into a different phase. And when that phase has ended, you know because you are filled with renewed inspiration and renewed motivation. And then it's time to pick things up and go back into the active phase again and make some more micro injuries for yourself. Spirit never left you during this time. Magic doesn't leave you during the dormant periods of your practice. It's when things are growing. The longer you practice, the more you recognize the cycle and trust the cycles of action and rest. Action and rest. Have you lost your magic? No. Maybe you've been carrying too many burdens. Maybe you've been growing. Maybe you've been transforming. Maybe you've been overtraining. But none of those things mean that you've lost your magic. It's time for a rest. The river still flows. The current is still there. The magic is still alive, but it's time for some downtime. I remember I had a teacher once who gave me the assignment to stay in bed all day because I was very type A about my magic. I still am to some degree. But she said, you need to stay in bed all day. I said, I don't have time for that. She said, it's your assignment. It's your magical assignment. And while you're in bed, you don't get to do anything magical. You can do anything else you want. Now, this was before cell phones and computers, so it was more like you can read, you can watch TV, you can do anything you want, but you will not leave bed except for to go eat and to go to the bathroom. But otherwise, you can get back in that bed. And it was excruciating for me to be in that bed all day. But I did finally get to a period of rest. And so I said, I did it. She said, good. Now I want you to do that again next week. And I want you to do that for a total of 4 consecutive weeks. Have one day where you are in bed all day long. I don't care what you have to do to schedule that and make sure that everybody in your household knows that you're not getting out of bed. And I balked at this. I said, I don't have time for this. I have things to do. And she said, well, if you were sick with the flu, you'd have to be in bed, wouldn't you? And I said, yeah. She said, probably more than one day. I said, yeah. She said, well, this is preventing you from having to do that. So I took the assignment and I did it. And to this day, I think I have about one day a week where I just stay in bed all day and I don't do anything. Now, I can do things if I want to, but I'm not compelled to do things. The other thing I learned from a magic teacher was not only taking one day off a week from not only magic, but from everything, but to take some time off a couple of times a year if I can, and to vacate. Vacate is the root word for the word vacation, to leave my surroundings and go somewhere else. The saying, change is as good as a rest. leaving, being away from everything. That was much harder for me than the 1 day a week in bed. I was convinced that I couldn't leave my business, my responsibilities, everything was going to fall apart. This is not the right time. I would say we'll do that maybe next year when things are different. And again, this was an assignment. No, you have to take a vacation within the next 3 months. You have to. It's part of your training. You must do it. So I thought, okay, I scheduled the vacation. And this happened probably for the next several years every time I would take a vacation. It took me about half the vacation to be relaxed enough to enjoy the vacation because I was so worried about what wasn't happening. I was so upset that I wasn't there. I thought for sure that I was going to have a financial collapse. Usually about halfway into the vacation, I realized, well, I'm gone anyway. There's nothing I can do about it. I may as well enjoy myself. So then I enjoyed myself for the rest of the vacation. Each and every time when I came back, not only did things not fall apart or had not fallen apart as a result of me being gone, I always had some sort of either inspiration about the next thing to do, which increased my productivity in my business, or things happened spontaneously as a result of me taking my hands off of everything and going away. Spontaneously, things started to increase my business, increase my productivity. So it wasn't that I lost productivity as a result of taking time off and leaving. I gained productivity. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm 100% comfortable having vacations, because I'm not. But I've built up a track record that is going to be beneficial not only for me being able to rest, but everything that I'm worried about falling apart as a result of me not being there is probably going to thrive as a result of me taking that rest. Periods of rest, both weekly and periodically by leaving town, getting out of Dodge, are a necessary part of our magical success. If we're only work, and we never have those down periods, those rest periods where we don't do anything, where we just rest and let things be the way they are, if we don't do that, we injure ourselves. We put ourselves through so much stress that we have a strain. When your strain is too significant, you will be forced to have the downtime. Now, when it's a physical strain, it's easy to say, yeah, I got to rest this. It hurts too much physically. Emotional strain, mental strain, and psychic strain sometimes are harder to pinpoint. You don't want to take it to the extreme where you have an actual collapse, psychic collapse, an actual breakdown, because those can take a long time to heal. So if you understand your psychic batteries need to be recharged on a regular basis, and you factor that into your practice, you're going to not only be much healthier, much more successful, and you're going to see your growth speed up as a result of that, but you are not risking deeper types of injuries. If you talk to people with a lot of background in the occult, you can hear a lot of stories about bad things that happen to them. And almost every single time I hear those stories, I'm hearing magical burnout. They usually project that onto, oh, it was the practice. I was doing this or I was doing that and I got burned. And what I'm hearing when I'm hearing those stories almost always is it had nothing to do with that. This was all you overtraining and injuring yourself psychically, injuring yourself mentally and emotionally. So if you understand that going in and you recognize that every workout must be followed by a period of rest, then you understand that you don't do spell. You do a spell, you take a break. You go through an initiation of some sort, there's a lot of stress involved with that. So once you're done, you take some time off. You don't do anything more. You don't do any more big work. You don't just perpetually do the dark magic course over and over and over again. No, you do that course and you leave it for a year and then maybe come back to it next year. You do those bodybuilding exercises in a witch's primer. You can take those 5 lessons in a witch's primer and build your power bodies once a year, twice a year. But once you do that, stop, rest. So every magical success must be followed by a period of dormancy, or you risk burnout. If you're experiencing a period where you're feeling like, my magic's not working, I've lost my powers, what's wrong? What's wrong? Probably what's wrong is you haven't allowed yourself to rest. You haven't given yourself the gift of recovery. Sometimes the next spiritual step is not another effort. Sometimes the next spiritual step is recovery and rest. This week, I want you to notice where your stresses are and notice where those stresses might be turning into strains. And you know that they're strains because you're either doing something that you don't need to be doing, such as carrying a burden that's not yours to carry, or you're doing something that's very positive, but not following it up with a rest. Ask yourself, how much downtime am I getting? Be willing to alter your practice to include those downtimes, to include those dormant periods, those periods of rest. And notice how much more effective you are in the results of your magic. It's just like me with a vacation. You'll maybe worry, oh no, I can't take time off from my magic. I've got all this stuff I have to do. I'll lose my skill. Notice the feeling with that and take the rest anyway. And when you come back to your practice, notice how not only did you not lose anything, but everything's better. And a lot of those other spells that you thought you had to cast took care of themselves. You didn't need to do those spells anymore. What you needed was to rest and integrate. Allow yourself one act this week of genuine recovery. Notice what happens as a result of you doing nothing. The power of doing nothing is immense. Look at your calendar. Where can you vacate the premises? It doesn't have to be an expensive vacation. It just means getting out of Dodge. If you can only do it for the day, do it for the day. Leave home for the day. If you can do a weekend, and notice how much more successful your life is and your magic is. Remember that a vacation is not so that you can go and work magic in a new location to do a magical pilgrimage somewhere, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about putting it down for a week or a couple days, having a dark time once a week and having a dark week every few months. And recognize that the more you do this and the more you give yourself this dark time, not only do you not lose your skills, but they improve, just like the muscles grow during those periods of rest between workouts. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I so appreciate you. Until next time, blessed be.